I flipped the coin one last time, just to see if fate was still mocking me. It clinked on the sidewalk and spun like it had somewhere better to be. I didn't even bother catching it. I already knew the answer. It didn't matter what side it landed on, heads or tails, I'd already lost. 3 months earlier, I was standing on a rooftop in Austin, ring box in my jacket, grinning like an idiot. The city skyline behind us, my hands shaking not from nerves, but from how damn certain I was. Bella said yes with tears in her eyes. She kissed me like she meant it, and I believed her. God, I believed her. I was the one who wrote the first line of code for our startup. I pitched it to Jason, my best friend since undergrad. He was slicker, smoother, better at charm and handshakes, while I lived in back-end systems and slept with whiteboards. We agreed, my brains, his pitch. 50-50. Turns out, 50-50 means nothing when the paperwork says otherwise. It started small. Bella missed dinner 2 nights in a row, said work was insane. Jason was too busy to loop me in on meetings. Then, one morning, I walked into our shared office to find the glass door etched with a new name, Voxen Labs, Jason B. Halpern, founder and CEO. My name wasn't even on the wall. I didn't confront them right away. I gave them the benefit of the doubt, mistake, miscommunication, a temporary decision until we secured Series A funding. But then I saw it, the pitch deck, the one Jason sent out to investors, my code, my algorithm, my UX flow, all under his name. I didn't even recognize the version of me I became after that. Bella stopped pretending a week later. She moved her stuff out while I was at the gym, left a note that said, "You're too comfortable being overlooked. I can't live like that." Overlooked? I was the one who paid rent for 6 months while she figured herself out. I was the one who skipped job offers to build a future for us, but she wanted someone flashier, someone with clout. Jason offered her both, and apparently she took it before I ever got to offer her my last name. I stayed silent. At first because I didn't want to be petty, then because I didn't know who to talk to. Who believes the guy who codes in the dark and doesn't speak up? By the time I got a lawyer involved, the patent had already been filed, in Jason's name. The investor calls I used to be on, ghosted. The company email, deactivated. My access revoked from every system I helped build. I couldn't even get my old laptop back. I had nothing except one saved backup. One fragment of proof I still owned a piece of the origin, time-stamped code, local commits, Slack threads. Evidence they hadn't scrubbed completely. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I tried to go nuclear, thought about posting it online, blasting them on Reddit, Twitter, LinkedIn, burn it all down. But I didn't want to scream into the void. I wanted clarity, not chaos. That's when I met Lena at the local bar, of all places. She was sitting alone, reading court documents like they were comic books. I must have stared too long because she looked up and said, "If you're planning to sue someone, at least order a drink first." Turns out she was a legal analyst, freelance, sharp as hell. I told her the short version. She didn't blink. "I see this kind of theft all the time," she said. "People think silence means consent. You waited too long, but maybe not too late." We met twice a week after that. She taught me what receipts actually meant, what timelines would hold up in court, how narratives win lawsuits, not just facts. She wasn't impressed by my technical prowess. She was impressed I hadn't broken anything. "Revenge is a story," she told me. "You want justice, start writing yours." So I did, quietly, thoroughly. Not for a tweet, not for an audience, but for evidence. I didn't want to just be right, I wanted to be undeniable. It's strange what people think you'll stay silent about. In the weeks after Bella left and Jason erased me from our company, I learned exactly how invisible someone like me could be. I didn't throw chairs or scream into conference calls. I just vanished from their version of the story. No mention of me on the website, no trace of me in press interviews. The headlines read, "Jason Halpern's Vision for AI Ethics." Vision? He couldn't debug a toaster. I didn't want to be angry. I wanted to understand what made them think I wouldn't fight back. I'd spent so long playing the steady one, the rational friend, the supportive boyfriend. My silence had always been mistaken for stability, but it had also taught them something dangerous, that I wouldn't defend what was mine. Lena wasn't having that. "This wasn't a breakup," she told me one night. "It was a hit job with paperwork." We went through every scrap I had, email threads, Git commits, project boards, text messages, even the old notebook I sketched ideas in during our late-night sessions. Lena catalogued everything like she was building a case against a corporation, because she was. "Don't just prove what they took," she said, "prove what you built." It took 2 months, 2 months of late nights, of learning how to write an affidavit, of emailing former clients to get dated testimonials, of tracking the digital footprints Jason didn't think to erase. Meanwhile, Voxen Labs launched beta access to my platform. The press called it the most human-centered AI interface ever designed. My interface, my design. They even kept the same error messages I coded for test mode, a tiny detail I never shared. That was the moment I stopped doubting what I was doing. That was the moment I knew this wasn't paranoia, it was theft, polished, branded, and sold. I filed the copyright claim the next morning. Jason's lawyer called Lena 2 days later. His tone was professional, but thinly veiled panic coated every word. They wanted to avoid escalation. Translation: "We believe you now, we didn't settle." I didn't want hush money or an NDA. I wanted it on record. I wanted the world to know the version of the story they told had missing pages. And I had every one of them. Lena advised against going public too soon, but I did post something, short, clean, factual. Sometimes silence isn't humility. Sometimes it's just someone waiting until they have enough proof. More soon, AG. No names, no hashtags, just pressure. Bella saw it though. She texted me after nearly 3 months of ghosting. "Bella, this isn't who you are." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't reply, because I was exactly this now. A week later, a journalist from the Circuit Report emailed me, said he'd heard rumblings about a misattributed software origin story, asked if I'd speak off record. I forwarded it to Lena. "Give him just enough to keep digging," she said. "But don't tell him everything. Let them sweat." Jason must have caught wind, because suddenly Voxen's marketing campaign went quiet. No new updates, no beta expansion. Their social media shifted from big ideas to neutral tech trivia. The silence was loud. Then Bella posted a photo. Her and Jason smiling on a boat, champagne in hand. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find the right person." That was the moment something clicked. She never believed in the work. Not really. She believed in proximity to power. And when I stopped being the shortcut, she switched seats. I wasn't her loss. I was just a phase she grew out of when a louder opportunity came knocking. And for once, it didn't even hurt. Not because I was over it, but because I finally knew where I stood. Behind them, never again. 2 weeks before the hearing, Lena handed me a folder. It was a preliminary agreement. Jason wanted to resolve the matter amicably by offering equity, a quiet acknowledgement buried in internal memos, and a financial payout. I declined and filed a formal cease and desist for continued usage of proprietary elements in their launch. The hearing wasn't dramatic, no cameras, just a conference room and a neutral arbitrator who listened while Lena laid out our case like chess pieces. Jason sat across the table, visibly sweating. Bella wasn't there. When it ended, the arbitrator simply said, "Based on the documentation, authorship appears clear. Recommend removal of infringing elements and a corrected attribution statement in all public-facing materials." That was it. No headlines, no handcuffs, just acknowledgement, cold and clinical. But when Voxon's site updated that week, there it was. A line of text under the product description. Originally developed in collaboration with Alexander Gray. It wasn't much, but it was mine. People noticed. The journalist published his article. Former clients reached out. A local podcast invited me to speak about intellectual theft in the tech world, and through it all, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like I had finally stepped out of someone else's shadow. When I walked by the place where I'd flipped that coin months ago, I didn't look for it on the ground. I just kept walking. I didn't need luck anymore. I had truth. The story didn't end when they added my name. Recognition isn't restoration. It doesn't return what was stolen, just confirms it happened. I watched the tech blogs report the update like it was some quiet footnote. Initial development credited to former partner Alexander Gray. Former, as if I'd walked away willingly, as if betrayal was a decision we made together. Lena said the correction was a win. Legally, she was right, but law doesn't fix what silence corrodes. I didn't want applause, I wanted accountability, not just from Jason, from everyone who looked away, nodded, stayed neutral. People who shared LinkedIn posts praising the launch while knowing, deep down, I was missing from the story. But accountability doesn't come by demand. You have to build it. And I was done waiting for invitations. I filed for an LLC 2 weeks after the hearing. Nothing flashy, no launch parties or paid ads. Just a clean name, registered trademarks, and the domain I'd bought quietly years ago when the idea was still forming in the back of my mind. SynPath. The product wouldn't be big, not at first, but it would be honest, no performance, no inflated mission statements, just data tools that worked and respected the user. I built the beta solo. I knew the code. I didn't need help this time, just time and enough distance from everything they'd touched. At night, I met with developers who had left Voxen quietly, some I hadn't spoken to since the early days. They weren't surprised when I told them what happened. One of them said, "We wondered where you went, figured you got pushed out." Pushed out, like I'd been an afterthought even in their minds. That line stuck with me. Turns out that's how erasure works. Not all at once, but piece by piece, until even the people around you accept the new version. Not this time. Bella didn't reach out again until after the article dropped. Not the blog post, not the software update, the feature. The circuit report published a full exposé, my name in the title. A timeline of the deception, documented, verified, public. Her name wasn't mentioned, but she recognized the shape of her silence in the gaps. Bella. You didn't have to drag it all into the spotlight. I stared at the message, then replied, Me. I didn't. I just turned on the lights. She never wrote back, but I wasn't done. Jason, trying to salvage face, went on a local startup panel. He talked about the importance of team synergy and shared vision. I watched the live stream, waiting to see if he'd mention me. He didn't, until the end. A moderator asked, "What would you do differently if you could restart Voxen from scratch?" He paused, just long enough to pretend it mattered. Then, maybe choose different partners. That wasn't regret. It was a smirk with better lighting. He still believed he won. I wasn't angry, I was clear, because clarity gives you options. The next morning, I uploaded a series of open-source documentation files, not revenge posts, no rant threads, just proof, raw and clean, of what I'd built, what they'd used, what I'd recovered, timestamps, architecture notes, Slack archives. Developers love truth when it comes in code. By the end of the week, my repo had more forks than their launch announcement. People started tagging me. This guy wrote the bones of Voxen. He's rebuilding something better and not selling out. That's when the calls started, not from old friends, from investors. The ones who'd turned me down months ago were now asking to reconnect, to chat about direction. I said no. Not yet. SynPath wasn't a pitch, it was a foundation, and I wasn't about to hand it over just because the winds changed. I wasn't Jason. I wasn't building buzz. I was building something that would outlive it. One night, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. Jason, you made your point publicly. I hope you're proud of the mess. I know you think you won, but the industry moves fast. People forget. They'll forget you too. I played it twice, not out of shock, out of fascination. Even now, even after all of it, he believed visibility meant victory. He couldn't imagine power being built quietly, patiently, without need for spectacle, but I knew something he didn't. I didn't need them to remember my name. I needed to never forget my own. 3 months after the hearing, SynPath launched in beta. No countdowns, no confetti, just a login screen, a single welcome message, and a product that worked better than it promised. We had 500 users in the first 24 hours, 1,000 by the end of the month. One nonprofit called it the first platform that doesn't treat our data like a currency. That meant more to me than any award ever could. I still got emails from people asking if I was the guy from Voxen. I always replied the same way. I was never from Voxen. I was what they tried to bury. It wasn't bitterness, it was correction. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even trying to prove anything. I was just free. I didn't expect to hear her name again. It had been almost a year since Bella walked out. 10 months since Jason claimed the spotlight. 5 months since SynPath launched and proved I never needed either of them. I wasn't tracking their stories anymore. I didn't need to, but then I got the email. Subject line, Request for Reference, Isabella Moore. Sender, James Brighton, Editor-in-Chief, Better Future Journal. It was short, polite, said she'd listed me as a collaborator on a submitted essay. The piece was called Navigating Ethical Grey Areas in AI Leadership. I didn't laugh, I didn't curse. I just sat there, rereading that subject line until the screen blurred. It wasn't just the gall of it, it was the strategy. She knew what she was doing, attaching herself to my name, betting that I'd stay silent again, that I'd look away while she wrote herself into another story that wasn't hers. But I wasn't that man anymore. I replied professionally, briefly. We have not collaborated on any writing or research. I am not associated with this submission in any capacity. 2 days later, the editor followed up. Her piece was under review when they discovered striking similarities to a public talk I'd given at a developer conference months earlier. Verbatim phrases. Analogies I'd created, a case study I had anonymized in my slides. They thanked me for confirming the disconnect. She had tried to mirror my voice. Again, and this time it hadn't worked. That should have been enough. That single fracture, that small collapse. But it was only the start. One of my former colleagues, Olivia, messaged me the same week. You didn't hear this from me, but Jason's losing investors. Something about internal misrepresentation. Apparently, Voxon's valuation had been propped up by exaggerated usage metrics and unverified user retention. The new CTO, hired to scale the vision, had quietly resigned after discovering that Jason was counting demo logins as monthly actives. Bella, who'd been consulting for the PR team, had pitched a podcast deal that fell through when her credentials were challenged. Everything was unspooling, not fast, but publicly. I didn't smile. This wasn't triumph, it was inevitability. A few weeks later, I was invited to guest lecture at a graduate ethics course. Narrative systems in machine learning, my new specialty. I opened the talk not with slides, but with a question. Who gets to tell the story of a thing? The one who imagined it, the one who built it, or the one who sells it best? The room was quiet, attentive. No one laughed. They understood. Not because I told them what happened to me, but because they knew how often it happens everywhere. It wasn't about me anymore. After class, a student approached me. She looked hesitant. How do you stay calm when they take what you built? I didn't give her a clean answer, just told her what I'd learned. They can steal your words, your work, even your name. But if you rebuild with intent, with clarity, they can't own what comes next. That night, I found a letter in my inbox. No subject, no sender name, just the address. It was from Bella. I never expected to be erased. Now I know what it feels like. I won't ask you to fix anything. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, just recognition of her fall. She wanted to be seen again, even in failure. But acknowledgement is not redemption, and memory is not a free pass. I archived the email. The next week, I was invited to a panel at a national tech summit. My name was printed beside industry leaders I used to admire from a distance. I wasn't the keynote, I didn't need to be. After the panel, someone stopped me near the exit, a junior founder, shaky voice, direct gaze. "You're the reason I didn't quit. I followed your repo during the lawsuit, saw how you built everything back." I thanked him, genuinely, but it stayed with me. Not because it flattered me, but because it confirmed something bigger. I was no longer just recovering, I was contributing. Jason finally reached out again, through a lawyer this time. They wanted to acquire part of SynPath's back-end architecture for a new product they were pivoting toward. Offered equity, licensing, press collaborations. I didn't even reply. Lena handled the communication, sent a firm decline, and included a cease and desist for derivative use. "They're spiraling," she said over coffee. "The collapse is slow, but it's happening." I didn't celebrate. I went back to work. Months passed. Bella's name stopped appearing on social media altogether. Jason's startup rebranded under new leadership. Investors moved on. The world didn't explode. The sky didn't fall. Just two people fading from a story they once tried to control. And me, I kept writing. Not manifestos, not rants, just quiet documentation of code, of systems, of patterns I wanted to preserve. I hired a team, not because I needed help immediately, but because I wanted to build with people who knew what it meant to be underestimated. We weren't trying to go viral, we were trying to last. Some stories burn everything down, mine didn't. It just stopped asking for permission to exist. They called it a revenge arc. I never did. It was a return, not to what I had before, but to who I could have been all along, and they can't take that. Not again. I hadn't spoken to my brother in almost 4 years. Eli and I had grown up in the same house, under the same roof, with the same parents who expected everything from me and nothing from him. I was the capable one, the future engineer. He was the artist, the runner, the kid who left home at 17 and never came back for long. We weren't on bad terms, just no terms. Distance had become the default. Until last month, when I got a text. "Eli, you still in Austin?" I didn't know what made him reach out. The last time we spoke was a rushed call after Dad's second surgery. We'd both said we'd visit, neither of us did. So this time, when he suggested coffee, I said yes, without asking why. We met at a quiet place near the trail loop. I got there early, unsure if he'd show. He did. No fanfare, no backstory. Just, hey, like we'd seen each other last week. We sat outside, and for a few minutes neither of us said much. Then he looked at me and asked, "Did you ever feel like you had to earn being noticed?" It wasn't a casual question. It landed sharp, like he'd been carrying it for years. I nodded. I think we both did, just in different ways. He told me he'd been following my journey, not publicly, not through posts or news articles, but quietly. He read the Voxon case report, listened to my podcast interview, checked out SynPath. "You were always the one they bet on," he said. "I guess I assumed you didn't need anything." There it was again, the same lie that followed me everywhere. That silence meant strength. That self-sufficiency was a choice, not a shield. "I needed everything," I said. "I just stopped asking." We didn't try to solve the years between us. We didn't unpack all the missed birthdays, unread messages, or parent-fueled comparisons. We just sat there, watching people run past us, and acknowledged that something had shifted. We weren't boys anymore. We were men trying not to disappear into someone else's idea of who we should be. That same week, I got the invitation. The National Board for Tech Ethics was forming an advisory group for government-level policy guidance on AI systems and data transparency. Someone had nominated me, not for buzz, not for recognition, for record. Actual documentation of building systems that prioritize dignity over dominance. At first, I hesitated. I didn't like boards. I didn't trust how committees diluted urgency into white papers. But then I read the nominee list. Most of them were the same people I used to watch from a distance, the ones who sat on panels, while people like me sat in back rooms writing the tools. Maybe it was time we stopped sitting in the back. I joined. Our first meeting was virtual. Everyone introduced themselves like it was a conference full of resumes and policy speak. When it was my turn, I didn't list credentials. I just said, I'm here because I know what happens when the quiet ones don't speak up until it's too late. That was it. Later, one of the other advisors messaged me privately. A data scientist from Chicago said she'd been pushed out of her last role for raising questions about consent in healthcare modeling. Most people don't listen until it's convenient, she wrote, but maybe if more of us stay loud long enough, they'll have to. We started collaborating, not on tech, on testimony. Meanwhile, SynPath kept growing, not explosively, but steadily. Organizations started adopting our consent-first protocols. Some hospitals asked us to design opt-in interfaces for patient data instead of opt-out defaults. It was niche, it was slow, but it was right. That became our new internal policy. Correct over convenient, it wasn't marketable, but it attracted the right people. The ones who stayed late without asking for credit, who reviewed every privacy clause twice before shipping anything, who knew that the integrity of code started before the first line was written. One night I got a call from my mother. She rarely reached out, but this time she sounded calm. Different. I read the interview, she said. You spoke well, you didn't sound angry. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a test. I didn't answer. Your father asked if you'd want to come by. He's trying to remember more these days. Sometimes he forgets why you stopped coming. I nearly said, he stopped seeing me first, but I didn't. Instead, I said, maybe, and meant it. A month later, I stood in my childhood driveway again. The garden was overgrown. The porch light flickered like it always had. Some things don't change, even when people do. Inside, my dad sat quietly on the couch. When he saw me, he blinked a few times, then smiled. The kind of smile people wear when they're not sure if they're remembering the past or making it up in real time. You look different, he said. I am. We didn't talk about Voxen or Bella or anything sharp. He just asked how work was. I said, stable. He nodded like that word meant something more than he could say. When I left, I didn't feel healed, just level. Sometimes that's enough. At our next advisory meeting, I was asked to draft a statement on developer accountability. Everyone else brought bullet points and citations. I brought a memory. When people ask who created a system, they rarely ask who got left behind to build it. True accountability means no one gets to erase the architect because someone else sells it louder. That line made it into the final draft. It wasn't revenge, it was record. A few weeks ago, Eli sent me a photo. It was of a mural he painted downtown. Bright colors, angular forms, a single phrase across the bottom in small black text. You don't have to be loud to be real. I didn't ask if it was about me, I just saved it. Some echoes don't come from shouting. Some echoes start with silence and end with truth. I never thought I'd be invited back to the stage that once ignored me. When the email came from the organizers of the National Tech Equity Conference, I read it twice, just to believe it was real. They weren't just asking me to attend, they were asking me to close it out. Keynote speaker. A year ago, my name didn't appear on a single press list, investor board, or advisory panel. Now I was being offered the final word at a gathering of the very institutions that once held the doors half shut, while people like me waited outside. I didn't say yes immediately, not because I wasn't ready, I was, but because I knew the weight of what it meant. Not just to speak, but to speak from a place that wasn't anger or bitterness or vindication. I wanted to speak with clarity, and that takes time. The weeks leading up to the event moved fast. SynPath hit its 1-year mark. We'd expanded our team, launched a healthcare integration, and consulted on transparency models for 2 government pilot programs. The press didn't always notice, but the right people did, the ones building for impact instead of image. One of them, a program director from an East Coast university, called to tell me they were using our open source protocol in their AI ethics curriculum. "Your documentation became more than reference," she said. "It became instruction." That stuck with me, not because it was flattering, but because it was proof. You don't have to be first to matter, just right when it counts. The day before the conference, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in over a year. It still had the old receipts, screenshots, dates, timelines, forgotten emails. All the evidence I once held like armor. I thought I'd burned through the anger, but as I looked through them, I realized something else had happened. I didn't need these anymore, not to prove I was right, not to prove I was wronged, just not at all, because the people who once erased me were no longer the authors of my story. I was, and not just in code or courtrooms, but in the quiet ways that outlast hype. So I closed the folder, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. The day of the keynote arrived. I walked onto the stage calmly. No spotlight, just me, a mic, and a room full of people waiting to hear about equity, inclusion, the future of tech, the lessons we still refuse to learn. But I didn't start with systems or statistics. I started with this. There was a time when my work didn't have a name. Someone else gave it theirs. For a while, I believed that silence was safer than conflict. I don't believe that anymore. No applause, just attention. So I kept going. I told them about stolen ideas, about erasure that doesn't come from malice, but convenience, about how systems fail not because of villains, but because too many people benefit from staying quiet. And then I told them what happened next, how I rebuilt. Not for revenge, but for preservation. How I didn't want to be famous, I just didn't want to be replaced. That's all anyone wants, really, to matter accurately. After the keynote, people lined up to talk. Not sponsors or journalists, but interns, engineers, educators, people who said, "That happened to me too." I never thought I'd hear someone say it out loud. I've been carrying proof, but didn't know where to take it. I didn't give them solutions. I just told them what Lena told me. Receipts are only the beginning. What you build next is the rest. I got home late that night. Sorrel was waiting. She had watched the keynote live but didn't say much, just poured tea and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo, me and Eli, sitting on the trail bench from months ago. We weren't looking at the camera, just forward. On the back, Sorrel had written, "You didn't change the ending, you wrote a better beginning." 2 days later, I got a call from a small journalism non-profit. They wanted to do a long-form story, not about Voxen, not about the lawsuit, not even about SynPath. They wanted the whole arc, the erasure, the fight, the rebuild. The version that doesn't make headlines, but stays with people long after the article ends. I asked them why, because too many people don't know they're allowed to say, "That part of the story was mine," and we think your voice can help them say it. I said yes. Not for recognition, for record. I still walk past the bench sometimes, the same one I sat on when I transferred the last dollar out of that joint account, when I realized silence had a cost. But now I sit with others. People who reach out because they've read the story, because they're trying to write their own, And when they ask how I got through it, I don't give them a blueprint. I just say, start with the part they didn't believe you'd survive. That's where your voice gets the loudest. Epilogue. Jason's company was officially dissolved last quarter. The tech he built off mine was too flawed to scale. Bella pivoted to coaching, rebranded herself as a resilience consultant. I never heard from either of them again. And that's fine, because this story was never about beating them. It was about becoming undeniable in a world that tried so hard to pretend I wasn't even there. And in the end, that's what stayed. Not the betrayal, not the silence, just the version of me that refused to disappear. And that version he still builds. I didn't expect to see her name again, not in print. Bella Moore, panelist, Women in Ethical Tech, NYC. A former colleague sent me the flyer, no subject line, no commentary, just the digital poster, and Bella's name second from the top. There was a short description beneath her photo. Author, resilience strategist, advocate for truth in digital systems. She had found another narrative to step into, a new room to speak in. And again, she brought someone else's story with her. Only this time, the people in the room had already heard the other version. I didn't plan to go. I had a workshop that weekend. Travel didn't make sense. But curiosity has a strange gravity when it pulls from the past. So I booked a seat in the back row under a different name, not to confront her. I didn't need to anymore. I just wanted to watch. The panel was what you'd expect. Each speaker talked about transparency, bias in algorithms, the need for diverse voices in product design. Some were thoughtful, one was clearly reading from a script. Bella spoke last. Her tone was practiced, warm, persuasive, almost humble. When I started in tech, I didn't know how to claim space, she said. But I learned, and now I help others do the same. There it was. Not a lie, but not the truth. She didn't claim space. She occupied someone else's and stayed long enough to convince people it was hers. After the panel ended, the room filtered toward the networking lounge. I stood back, out of the way, unnoticed. She shook hands, took selfies, passed out cards. Then she saw me. Her smile faltered for just a second. Not panic, just recognition, like seeing someone you'd stepped over and realizing they'd never left the room. I didn't say a word. She didn't either. That was enough. Back in Austin, the non-profit article went live. The title wasn't dramatic, just simple, sharp. The architect behind the curtain, how one engineer reclaimed the system built to erase him. They got it right, the timeline, the context, the small details that mattered only if you'd lived them. I expected a modest response, a few shares in the tech world, maybe a comment thread, but it spread, not fast, not viral, just consistently, like something people needed to sit with. Emails came in, this made me cry. I kept waiting for your voice to crack, it never did. You told my story before I had the language for it. It wasn't about me anymore, that was the point. One message stood out. It was from a high school teacher in Portland. I used your article in my classroom. My students, mostly girls, mostly first gen, saw themselves in it. One of them said, "So you can lose and still win." I didn't know how to answer. I told her to follow your work. That's when it hit me. I wasn't building a product anymore. I was building a model, a blueprint for resilience that didn't require applause, just evidence. One that said, you can be misnamed, misused, and misunderstood, and still exist completely. I started getting requests to consult not just on tech, but on reputation recovery, not PR, not branding, just clarity. Founders who'd been pushed out, researchers whose data was published under someone else's name, creatives who lost contracts and didn't know how to prove the theft. They came not for advice, but for a framework, how to stay intact, how to rebuild without begging for recognition, how to speak without shouting, and I gave them what I had. Not because I was an expert, but because I'd survived it without disappearing. Sometimes that's all someone needs to see, a version of the future where they're still visible. One evening, Eli sent me a video. It was a classroom somewhere in Minneapolis. College students discussing narrative ethics in tech design. The professor asked them if systems can be moral without transparency. One of the students raised her hand and said, "Not unless we know whose voice built it." That line stuck with me for days. It reminded me why I still do this. Not to be remembered, to make remembering easier for others. A few months later, I was asked to return to the conference, this time to moderate. I almost declined, but then I thought of all the people who had been watching without saying a word, the way I once did. The quiet ones, the ones who take notes in the margins while someone louder claims the center. And I said yes. The morning of the panel, I arrived early and sat backstage. One of the younger speakers, a woman from a public health startup, paced nervously. She recognized me from the article and came over. "I just want to say, your story helped me stop giving away credit for my work, even when it made things awkward." I told her awkward was better than invisible. She laughed. I printed that line. During the panel, I didn't talk much. I asked questions that didn't let people hide in jargon. I kept the discussion grounded in authorship, not just outcomes. If your system fails, I asked, can the people it impacts find out who made it? Not one person gave a confident yes. That silence, that was the truth too. Later that night, I walked past the coin I once flipped on a sidewalk near the river trail. It had stayed where it landed, wedged between two cracks in the pavement. I used to think it was ironic, that symbol of chance. But now I saw it differently. I didn't lose anything that day. I just stopped leaving the outcome up to luck. I don't need rooms to say my name anymore. I just want them to say the right names. The ones who got cut out, the ones who kept receipts, the ones rebuilding without noise. Because the next time someone tries to rewrite the truth, there'll be too many of us watching, too many of us documenting, and silence won't protect them the way it used to.